I never thought a single piece of jewelry could stir up so much emotion in me. It wasn't the most extravagant necklace in the world, but when my husband placed that delicate gold chain in my hands on my birthday, I felt something shift. It was simple, timeless, with a small pendant shaped like an infinity loop. The kind of piece you could wear with anything, the kind that felt more like a part of you than an accessory. He clasped it around my neck himself, smiling with that quiet, confident look I fell in love with years ago. "Now you'll always have a piece of me with you," he whispered. It was such a romantic gesture, and I loved it, not just because it was beautiful, but because it was from him. My husband, Daniel, had come a long way since we first met. When we got married, he was ambitious but struggling, a man with dreams bigger than his bank account. Over the years, though, he built a business empire from the ground up. He became a millionaire before his 40th birthday, and life with him turned into something I could have never imagined. Luxury trips, charity galas, weekends in Paris, champagne at lunch, it all became normal. And yet the necklace felt different. Not because it was I never thought a single piece of jewelry could stir up so much emotion in me. It wasn't the most extravagant necklace in the world, but when my husband placed that delicate gold chain in my hands on my birthday, I felt something shift. It was simple, timeless, with a small pendant shaped like an infinity loop. The kind of piece you could wear with anything, the kind that felt more like a part of you than an accessory. He clasped it around my neck himself, smiling with that quiet, confident look I fell in love with years ago. "Now you'll always have a piece of me with you," he whispered. It was such a romantic gesture, and I loved it, not just because it was beautiful, but because it was from him. My husband, Daniel, had come a long way since we first met. When we got married, he was ambitious but struggling, a man with dreams bigger than his bank account. Over the years, though, he built a business empire from the ground up. He became a millionaire before his 40th birthday, and life with him turned into something I could have never imagined. Luxury trips, charity galas, weekends in Paris, champagne at lunch, it all became normal. And yet the necklace felt different. Not because it was more expensive than other gifts he'd given me, in fact, I was pretty sure it was, but because it felt personal. He had chosen it himself, not one of his assistants. He had wrapped it himself, too, clumsily, the paper crinkled and uneven. It wasn't a gift arranged by someone else. It was from him. That made it priceless to me. Still, I'm not a fool. Jewelry can be lost, stolen, or damaged. I've had pieces disappear over the years, an earring slipping off during a trip, a ring forgotten on a gym bench. And this necklace, as simple as it was, clearly wasn't cheap. I wanted to protect it. It wasn't about the money, it was about peace of mind. If anything happened to it, I wanted the reassurance that I could replace it, or at least have its value acknowledged. So, a few days after my birthday, over breakfast, I brought it up. "Hey," I said casually, stirring my coffee. "I was thinking about getting the necklace insured, just in case." Daniel's expression shifted instantly. One second he was relaxed, reading the news on his tablet. The next, his shoulders tensed, and he set it down slowly. "Insured," he repeated, as if I'd suggested burning it. "Yeah," I said carefully. "I mean, I've lost jewelry before, and it's a pretty valuable piece. It's just being practical." His jaw tightened. "It's not just a piece," he said. "It's a gift. It means something, and you want to put a price tag on it." I blinked. "No, Daniel, that's not what I mean at all. I love it. I just want to protect it. Isn't that a good thing?" But he wasn't convinced. He leaned back, arms crossed. "It's not a car or a house, Emily. It's a symbol. You don't insure symbols." The conversation ended there, awkward and unfinished. I didn't understand why he was so defensive. If anything, I thought he'd appreciate my caution. He'd always teased me about how careful I was with everything. But I let it go, or at least I tried to. 2 days later, I brought it up again, gently, after dinner. Same reaction. His eyes hardened, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Why are you obsessed with this?" he asked. "It's like you're trying to turn something emotional into a financial transaction." "It's because it's emotional," I said, feeling my own frustration bubble up. "I don't ever want to lose it." "Then don't," he snapped, and that was the end of the conversation. It didn't make sense. Daniel was always practical. He insured everything, from our cars to the art in our hallway. He even had insurance on his wine collection. Why was this necklace different? I started to wonder if maybe it was less about the necklace and more about something else. Maybe he felt like I was questioning the meaning of his gift. Maybe he thought I didn't value the sentiment behind it. But that wasn't true. I valued it more than anything. Still, I could feel something shift between us after those conversations. He became quieter around me, distracted, almost distant. I caught him staring off into space more than once, lost in thought. And every time I touched the necklace, I felt a pang of unease. It was supposed to make me feel closer to him. Instead, it was starting to feel like a thread unraveling something I didn't yet understand. A week after my birthday, the necklace still had that newness to it. The way a fine chain feels almost like water on your skin. The way you check your reflection in passing just to see it catch the light. I wore it everywhere. To brunch with Sophia, to a bored dinner with Daniel, even to the grocery store where the cashier complimented it, and I felt an adolescent flutter of pride. I told myself the insurance could wait. I told myself this was just a misunderstanding, that if I chose the right moment, we'd talk it through like we always used to. But the right moment never showed up. What showed up instead were tiny details that had no business standing next to each other. First, receipts. Not because I went looking, but because the new house manager, Anna, asked me to approve a stack of household expenses while Daniel was in Chicago. It was routine stuff: florist, wine, the usual offensive electricity bill. I wasn't hunting for anything, but I realized there was no receipt for the necklace, which was odd. Daniel is fastidious about records. He claims order is the only real luxury. He even keeps the receipts for shoelaces. Not because I care about the shoelaces, he once joked, but because I care about the habit. Second, his assistant, Mark. I asked gently if he happened to have the invoice for the necklace for my files. Mark froze for a second too long and then turned on his immaculate efficiency. He would check. He would circle back. He would ping accounting. His language grew more corporate the more uncomfortable he got, and when the email finally arrived, the attachment was a low-resolution PDF, crooked, cropped, and conspicuously missing a tax ID. The boutique's name looked like it had been typed last Tuesday on a home printer. Third, the boutique itself. Orifex Atelier, read the file. The name rang a distant bell because I'd walked past their Mayfair storefront dozens of times, more gallery than shop, a place that treated gold like language, not commodity. My curiosity wasn't malicious. I just wanted to know the story. They always had stories, metal worked from a family mold, a design inspired by an old country lullaby. So I called, not to accuse, to gush. The woman on the phone had the sing-song calm of a person who has said no. Our wait list is full 1,000 elegant ways. I described the piece. I described the clasp. I described the way the pendant, if you looked closely, was shaped like an infinity loop with a tiny twist, almost like a Möbius strip. She paused, made a sound of recognition, and then said the thing that planted itself in my rib cage like a splinter. We haven't produced that design in 18 months. We haven't sold any stock pieces in that silhouette since then, and we only do custom orders now. Do you have the client number? Client number? My laugh betrayed me. No, I didn't. I had a crooked PDF that looked allergic to accountability. She was kind about it. She told me to bring the necklace in whenever you like so they could clean it for me and verify the maker's mark. We stamp everything, she said, even custom work, discreetly. That night I couldn't unhear the word verify. It's amazing how one word can turn a warm gift into a cool object. I told myself I was being insulting. I told myself that people forget receipts, assistants fumble, and luxury houses can be pretentious about their own mythology. I told myself to drop it. But the next morning, Daniel made me coffee without asking if I wanted it, my favorite kind of thoughtfulness, and placed the cup exactly where the light hits the counter at 9. And yet when I lifted the cup, my hand trembled a little. That was the first sign that I didn't trust my own story anymore. I decided to go to Orifex, not to play detective, to shut up the noise in my head. I told Anna I'd be out for an errand, put on a sweater that didn't scream money, and took a car to Mayfair. The showroom was as beautiful as I remembered, quiet warm, with those pale wood vitrines that make everything look inevitable. A woman with a braid like a ribbon greeted me by name as if we'd met before. We hadn't. I explained, clumsily, apologetically, that I'd received a necklace and wanted to know more about its maker's mark. She smiled as if this were the most reasonable request in the world, led me to a small table, and handed me a velvet tray. I felt suddenly protective, the way you feel when a pediatrician holds your child's wrist and you pretend not to watch too closely. I unclasped the chain and placed it on the velvet as carefully as if it were made of breath. She took out a loop, the instrument looking like a toy in her elegant hands, and leaned in. Her face didn't change, but her silence did. Not a theatrical silence, no gasp, no raised eyebrow. The practiced silence of a professional who has found something they wish they hadn't. "What is it?" I asked too fast. She didn't look up. "I'm just checking the hallmarks," she said, the vowels honeyed with caution. "May I turn this over?" "Of course." My voice came out light, almost flirty, the way women sometimes put lace on panic. She examined the clasp, the loop, the underside of the pendant where a signature would live. Then she straightened and gave me the kindest version of bad news I've ever received. "This piece isn't one of ours." The tray between us might as well have turned into a canyon. She kept going, gentle but firm. "It's a lovely design, truly. Very close to one of our older silhouettes, but the metalwork on the edge is different. And the maker's mark." She paused again, choosing a path through a minefield. "It isn't a maker's mark. It's a laser-etched serial from a mass manufacturer." I had to swallow twice before words made it past my throat. "So it's not gold." She tilted the pendant until it winked. "It's gold-plated, high-quality plating but on brass." She added quickly, like she was cushioning a fall, "There are beautiful plated pieces. Some people choose them for travel, for safety. It's not inherently lesser, it's just not fine jewelry." I stared at the chain and thought of Daniel's hands fastening it at the nape of my neck. I thought of the breakfast argument, his almost moral outrage at the idea of putting a price on a symbol. I thought of the crooked PDF, of Mark's corporate sentences, of the boutique's polite invitation to verify. I thought of every time Daniel insured an asset without blinking, and something cold, precise, and very awake settled behind my eyes. "Could someone have made a copy of your design?" I asked, grasping at a thread that would keep meaning intact. "Like a dupe." She nodded sadly. "There are factories that do this very, very well. They borrow a silhouette, soften a detail, use a different clasp so they can claim it. Inspired by, not copied from. To the eye, especially in low light, it reads as fine, but under a loop it tells the truth." The truth, it's curious how quickly that word becomes anatomical. I felt flayed, and yet part of me wanted to laugh at my own naivete. In our circles, half the sparkle is theater. People rent watches for weekends. They borrow emeralds for galas. They stage generosity with other people's money like it's a form of performance art. Why should I be shocked by a plated pendant? Because he was people. He was my husband. He could have handed me a paper crane, and I would have kept it in a glass box. He didn't need the gold to be real for the gift to be real. He needed the truth to be real. And now, suddenly, the truth had turned to fog. I thanked the woman who offered to clean the necklace anyway. I let her. I watched as she placed the chain in a small bath, then patted it dry with a cloth so soft it looked like a cloud. She returned it with both hands, like a sacrament. "Wear it if you love it," she said. "Just don't let anyone tell you what it is." Outside, Mayfair pretended not to be a stage set. I stood on the pavement and realized I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. I didn't do either. I went home. On the way, the practical voice in my head woke up. Maybe the boutique was wrong. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe Daniel had asked Mark to pick something up, and the assistant, in a hurry, had chosen a copy. Maybe a jeweler had told him it was fine, and he believed it because he wanted to. Maybe there was a perfectly ordinary reason why a millionaire gave his wife a gold-plated necklace and then argued like a priest when she suggested insurance. I decided not to confront him. Not yet. Instead, I called our insurance broker not to add a policy but to ask a hypothetical. What documentation does one need to insure a personal jewelry piece? She was brisk. Appraisal for anything over a certain threshold. Receipt. Photos. Serial numbers, if any. She could recommend an appraiser. I thanked her and hung up. That night, Daniel came home early, cheeks wind-flushed, in a mood I wouldn't have recognized a year ago, restless, buoyant, impatient for no reason. He kissed me in the foyer and said we should go somewhere immediately. The way rich men try to outrun a feeling by buying scenery. I asked where. He said anywhere. Paris, Lake Como. "Let's chase light," he said, quoting an Instagram caption that would have made the old Daniel roll his eyes. I told him I had a meeting in the morning. He said skip it. I said I would next time. His smile tightened a millimeter. At dinner, he talked faster than the wine could explain. Deals in Dubai, a pitch in Seoul, a board member who had finally come around. He ordered dessert without asking if I wanted any, as if he were staging abundance for both of us. When the check came, he signed with the practiced flourish of a man whose signature opens doors, then insisted we walk home. He laced our fingers together and told me he had a surprise for me next week, something even better than the necklace. And just like that, the fog thinned enough for me to see the outline of a mountain I hadn't realized we were on. The performance, the velocity, the insistence. He was narrating a version of our lives that required me to stop asking how the story was being paid for. 2 days later, the second crack appeared. Not a rumor, not a headline, a number. I went to dinner with Sophia, the kind of friend who can hear a comma in your tone. I intended to tell her everything and ended up telling her almost nothing because the restaurant was too loud and the waiter too nosy. When the bill came, I reached for my wallet out of old habit. Card declined. Not a horror card's hiccup. I tried another, declined. The third went through. I laughed it off, a neat little lie about fraud alerts, and tucked the panic into my tote. In the car, I checked my email. 3 messages from the bank glowed back at me like small, white flags. Unusual activity. Temporary hold. Please contact your relationship manager. My stomach went cold in that slow, sinking way that tells you this won't be fixed with a screenshot and a compliment. At home, Daniel was in the study on a call, voice pitched low in that specific register men use when they are arguing with money. He ended it as I walked in, smiled, and asked about dinner. I told him my cards had been flagged. He frowned as if I'd told him the doorman had been rude. Inconveniences annoyed him more than problems. Problems at least had the politeness to show their size. "Bank nonsense," he said and kissed my forehead. "I'll call in the morning." Then, as if to erase my concern with theater, he handed me an envelope. Inside was a gift certificate for a couture house where I had never felt at home. "For next week," he said, "for the surprise." That night I didn't sleep. Not because of doom, because of arithmetic. My life for the past few years had been a garden where every plant looked watered. But gardens can be faked with rented blooms and clever lighting. The necklace, the receipt, the boutique, the cards, the surprise, the velocity, the sudden religiosity about symbols. When you put the facts side by side, they began to rhyme, and not in a way that made a pretty poem. In the morning, I called the bank myself. Daniel had handled our finances not because I was incapable, but because he was better at it. He said money was a language and he spoke it as a native. The relationship manager who had sent us Christmas hampers for years sounded newly formal. There had been limits adjusted as a precaution. Liquidity events in progress. Nothing to worry about. Standard stuff. I asked a precise question with an ordinary tone. Were we, in plain English, fine? She hesitated. "I can't speak broadly," she said, "but if you're making significant purchases, perhaps check with us a day ahead." When I hung up, I looked at the chain around my neck. It flashed back at me without shame. It wasn't the necklace's fault. It had told me the truth the only way it knew how, by refusing to become something it was. That afternoon, I called the appraiser the broker had recommended and made an appointment for a different piece of jewelry I actually knew the provenance of. I wanted to see the process. I wanted to understand what paper looks like when it tells the truth. The appraiser was clinical and kind. He explained how they test metal, how they map stones, how documentation is a choreography between evidence and reputation. He never once used the word trust. He didn't need to. The acid told the story. On my way out, he laughed about insurance companies being the only romantics left because they still believed in numbers. "You'd be amazed," he said, "how often something that should be simple gets complicated. Emotions do that to objects." He said it like a weather report. I went home. That week, the house felt like someone had moved the furniture half an inch while I was out. Every familiar thing carried a new shadow. Mark became more skittish. Anna, who notices everything, asked if I wanted to change florists, and I realized our usual invoice hadn't arrived. The chef's supplier swapped brands because of availability. The driver started mentioning a bit of traffic on routes that used to be fast, as if metaphors could save me a few minutes of suspicion. And then, because my life is apparently a novelist with a sense of timing, the third crack appeared in the most banal form: a charity. I'm on a board that funds legal education for women. We had a quiet luncheon to close out a scholarship round. Daniel was supposed to write the check that afternoon, the big one, the anchor pledge. He had promised the director personally. At the end of the event, she pulled me aside, hesitant, apologetic. The wire hadn't arrived. Not a disaster. These things happen, but could we check? I texted Daniel from the car. He replied with a thumbs up and a promise that read breezy. The wire landed 2 days later. Not nothing, just not the version of him I knew. By the time the surprise date rolled around, I didn't want couture. I wanted receipts. I wanted a conversation that didn't require me to pretend I couldn't hear the wobble in the floorboards. He, meanwhile, wanted Paris. Just 24 hours, he said. We'll be back before the board call Thursday. I booked the suite, the one with the terrace. In the plane, he fell asleep the way only men who believe someone else is flying can sleep. I stared out the window at a sky that didn't care about human arithmetic and planned a gentle confrontation. Not a cross-examination, a hand on the table. A sentence that began with "I feel." Perhaps even, "Help me understand." I wrote versions in my head and deleted them. I have never been good at rehearsing. In Paris, he performed romance so perfectly I could have forgiven a dozen sins. Flowers that looked like clouds, dinner where the chef sent out a dish he said he created for Madame. A late-night walk where he told me the story of the first deal he ever closed, back when faith was the only capital he had. He reached into his jacket, slid a small box across the table, and told me to open it. Inside, a diamond bracelet that would have paid for my first apartment 3 times over. My stomach turned the way it does when sugar meets a secret. I didn't ask where it came from. I didn't ask for the receipt. I didn't even ask why the clasp felt lighter than it should. I smiled, I thanked him, I let him fasten it around my wrist. And I went back to the sweet bathroom and cried silently while the city glittered like a lie I wasn't ready to prosecute. On the flight home, I realized I had been asking the wrong question all along. It wasn't "Why won't he let me insure the necklace?" It was "Why does he need me to believe something about our life that only holds if I never measure it?" The necklace wasn't a bauble. It was a test balloon. It was the first small thing that couldn't carry his story without buckling. Back in London, I did the least dramatic and most adult thing I could think of. I called a lawyer, not to file anything, to ask what documents I should already have if I wanted to sleep well. Titles, deeds, trust instruments, partnership agreements, prenup addendum. She spoke like rain, steady, practical, unafraid. "Gather," she said. "Not because you're leaving, because you're living." I thanked her, hung up, and opened the safe. That's when I discovered the fourth crack, not the absence of paper, the presence of new paper. A quiet line change on an account. A transfer marked temporary with no date. A personal guarantee attached to a subsidiary I'd never heard of. Nothing catastrophic on its own. Together, they sounded like a hallway with the lights off. That night, Daniel slept as if he had been forgiven in advance. I lay awake and listened to the house breathe. On my nightstand, the necklace pooled on the marble like a thin comma in a sentence I had stopped understanding. I loved him. That was not the question. The question was whether the person I loved was still in the room, or whether the performance had replaced him so gradually I hadn't noticed when the curtain never fell. In the morning, I booked another appointment. Not with a jeweler, with someone who reads numbers the way gemologists read light. If the truth wanted to be verified, I would give it every instrument it needed. The woman my lawyer recommended introduced herself as a forensic accountant, but she could just as easily have said lighthouse. Her name was Harper, mid-40s, hair in a practical knot, sleeves neat enough to make you trust her before she even opened a folder. She didn't do the TV thing, no theatrics, no eyebrows designed to make you confess. She asked for 90 days of statements on anything with our names on it, joint or separate, plus trust ledgers, credit lines, and any letters, your husband's counsel might describe as cordial. It made me laugh despite myself. She smiled like she'd meant to do that. I'm not here to prove a crime, she said evenly. I'm here to understand flow. Money has a gait. You can tell what it's doing by how it moves. We agreed on discretion. She'd work from her office. No email to our shared accounts. No subject lines that sounded like alarms. I couriered the first stack, what I could pull without waking the house, then went home and did the thing you do when you're trying to behave normally. I made dinner like a recipe could save a life. Daniel was late. He texted 3 times in the same tone men use when they want to be forgiven by proving they're busy. Call ran over, traffic, 5 minutes. He arrived with the weather on his coat and kissed me with a fondness I couldn't doubt. I hated that about him in that moment, the way tenderness had never been the problem. I didn't mention Harper. I didn't mention Orifex. I didn't mention the bank. I said the soup needed more salt, and he agreed like a man relieved to be asked a solvable question. The next morning, while he was at the gym, I opened the safe again and scanned for what I'd missed. It's funny how paper looks different once you've stopped pretending not to read it. There were personal guarantees I'd skimmed as routine that suddenly pulsed. Daniel had signed backstops for a subsidiary I'd never heard of, Aurelius North Shore Partners, tied to a revolving credit facility whose covenants were tight enough to singe. There was a line change on a trust distribution schedule, briefed as more tax efficient, that had the side effect of placing me behind 2 corporate obligations if something hiccuped. None of it screamed. Together, it hummed a frequency I couldn't ignore. Harper's first memo landed 2 days later. Not a manifesto, a page and a half with bullets like chess moves. Liquidity compressed, not absent, compressed. Sweeps into operating accounts followed by immediate vendor outflows. Credit lines tripped, then cured inside grace windows. Pattern not panic, yet. Personal spend steady. Vendor pay stretching from net 15 to net 45 in certain entities. Notable, 2 wires to Madrigal Displays Limited. Labeled Event Inventory Prop. She added a note in italics. Prop inventory for events can mean staging, sets, floral. It can also mean items used to maintain optics. Then a practical ask, could I authorize direct access to the statements so I didn't have to keep playing courier? I said yes, and felt something in me unclench at the relief of letting a competent stranger touch the problem. I Googled Madrigal Displays and found what any diligent spouse would. A warehouse on the outskirts that supplied fixtures to retailers and event jewelry to stylists. Their website was aggressively mediocre. Mannequins, risers, velvet trays, gold-tone chains by the dozen. I clicked through the catalog until an infinity loop pendant stared back at me from the screen with a price that made my face go hot. 50 units per case. Discounts for volume. I closed the laptop. I stood very still. I told myself there were explanations that didn't insult either of us. Maybe a PR team had ordered props for a brand shoot. Maybe a stylist had needed decoy pieces for a gala. Maybe I was connecting lines because I no longer trusted blank space. That afternoon, I took the diamond bracelet to an independent appraiser recommended by the insurance broker. Different office from the first man. This one was a woman with a scientist's desk. Neat chaos, calipers, tiny scales, a loop sitting in a dish like a spoon. She did not coo or condescend. She weighed, measured, lit, cooled, warmed. She explained each step without drama, the way a good teacher can talk you through a panic attack without numbing it. When she finished, she folded her hands and delivered a diagnosis that was somehow both kind and surgical. The stones are moissanite, she said. Excellent cut, very convincing to the eye. The metal is rhodium-plated silver, beautiful workmanship overall, but not diamond, not platinum. I stared at the bracelet. It sparkled back like it owed me nothing. Is there ever a good reason to do this? I asked, voice too even. She shrugged with the gentleness of someone who has stopped being shocked by human economies. Travel, safety, public events where you don't want the liability of certain pieces. Some clients have duplicates made. Some partners buy decoys as practice before a larger purchase. None of it is inherently dishonest until it's presented as real. Can you write that down? I asked, as neutrally as possible. Of course, she said and did. On my way home, I texted Sophia a single line. Can you meet tonight? She said yes with the speed of a friend who keeps her evening light on for you by habit. At her kitchen island, I told the whole story this time. The necklace, the boutique, the bank, the bracelet, the prop vendor. She listened without interrupting, then poured me a glass of cold white wine and asked, "Do you want to be right or do you want to be safe?" "Both," I said, and we both laughed like we knew that was a luxury. "Then move like you might be wrong," she said. "Protect first, confront second." Protect. The word landed inside me like a lodestone. The next morning, I did 3 things before coffee. I instructed my lawyer to open a separate account in my name only and fund it with an amount that wouldn't trigger a war, but would let me breathe if breathing became a solo sport. I gave Harper a limited power of attorney to talk to institutions without— "I saw the piece," I said, as neutral as a receptionist. He rolled his eyes with affectionate contempt. "Journalists can't afford nuance," he said. "We're fine, we just have to be careful." The word slid between us like a glass I didn't want to catch. "Careful how?" I asked. "Exactly." He paused a fraction too long. "Optics," he said. "Timing, covenants, it's a storm, I've sailed worse." I let him have the metaphor. "Then you won't mind if I take a raincoat," I said lightly, and he smiled like I'd made a joke. I hadn't. That night, while he was on the terrace with a call, my phone lit up with a message from Harper. Patterns clearer. North Shore's covenant package is tight. Hitting ratios not impossible, but current spend assumes liquidity that isn't there. Also, Madrigal appears more than once across entities, not a one-off. I typed "thank you" and stared at the words like they could build a wall around me if I looked long enough. The next crack wasn't financial. It was human. Mark, the assistant, asked to drop something by rather than email it. He arrived with a portfolio and hands that gave away a week of bad sleep. He tried to do chirpy and landed on brittle. "I wanted to make sure you had this," he said, sliding a neat packet across the counter. Inside, an updated inventory of personal gifts given by the company to key stakeholders' families for the annual compliance disclosure. It's the kind of document no one reads until a regulator asks for it. My eyes skimmed down the list. Watches, scarves, curated experiences, jewelry labeled tokens, line items with values that made me laugh out loud. The bracelet sat there at a number that wouldn't buy a decent bicycle. The necklace at less than a hotel night. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked without looking up. He swallowed. "Because it's going to legal," he said, "and I thought you should see it first." "Why?" I repeated, softer this time. He stared at the island. "Because I can't keep telling myself I don't know what the truth is," he said, almost a whisper. "And because you've always paid the florist on time." It was such a strange marker of character I wanted to laugh and cry at once. I put a hand on the counter to steady myself and said, "Thank you," like we were in a church. After Mark left, I took the necklace off. I didn't cry. I didn't perform privacy for the air. I put it in a small dish and sat in the quiet until my ears found the sound the house makes when it feels someone breathing differently. That weekend, the last piece clicked into the ugly little puzzle. Sophia sent a screenshot from a private forum for stylists, a thread about executive-friendly props from Madrigal displays, bracelets, chains, cufflinks with brand-adjacent silhouettes for event safety and PR discretion. A user had commented, "Clients want the look for photos without the liability, wives included." No one replied to the wives part. They didn't have to. The thread moved on to clasp mechanisms and how to get plating that photographs like high carat in cold light. I forwarded the screenshot to no one. I closed my eyes. I pictured every gala photo I had smiled for without recognizing the inventory code hanging around my neck. Someone will read this and decide it was always about money. It was. It was about reality. About whether the person across from you trusts you with the cost of the life you share. You can weather a storm holding hands if both of you are allowed to say, "That wave is high," without being told to admire the boat. Monday morning, I asked Daniel point-blank at the kitchen table, in daylight, with my voice set to gentle, "Is the necklace real?" He did not flinch, points for training. He did not bluster, points for talent. He did something more dangerous, he looked hurt. Of course it's real, he said. It's from me. Is it gold? I said quietly. He stared at me for a long time, then went for the closest truth that could save him. It's gold-plated, he said, like a man choosing a lesser sin. It's safer. We've been followed before. I didn't want you to feel like a target. The bracelet is the same. I should have told you. I didn't want to make you anxious. I nodded as if that story could carry weight. Then why fight me on insurance? I asked, if safety was the point. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Because it made it feel like an asset, he said. Like you were preparing to replace it. I didn't like that feeling. There it was, the tidy romance that asked me to call a number love. I held his gaze, not angry, not pleading. What else aren't you telling me? I asked. He made a gesture I recognized from boardrooms, palms up, a pantomime of openness. It's a rough quarter, he said. We'll tighten. We've done it before. We'll be fine. I said nothing. Silence is a mirror. He looked into it and said the thing he thought might cure me. I have a surprise for you next week. I looked at the dish where the necklace lay. I thought of Harper's bullet points, of the appraiser's acid, of Mark's brittle chirp, of Sophia's steady lamp. I thought of Madrigal's catalog page and the way moissanite throws a colder rainbow. I thought of the wire to the scholarship arriving 2 days late. I thought of the bank manager's careful grammar. Please don't buy me anything for a while, I said. He smiled like I'd made a joke. He always did that when a boundary sounded like a request. That afternoon, Harper called. 2 more things, she said. There's a personal guarantee attached to an offshore feeder fund that assumes your consent if you're considered a beneficial participant by marriage. It's not signature-bound, it's status-bound. Your lawyer will want a look. And the Madrigal invoices are recurring, quarterly, for 2 years. For 2 years, I repeated, as if language might change if I said it nicely. Prop inventory can cover a lot, she said. If I had to guess, a machine for appearances was built. It usually starts small, 1 event, 1 photo op, and then it continues because it works. Wives included, I said, and she was quiet for a breath. I'm sorry, Harper said, not as a professional, but as a woman. That night I slept, not because anything was solved, because I had finally stopped gaslighting myself. In the morning, I moved the necklace from the dish to a small linen envelope and put it in a drawer with passports and winter gloves. I didn't need to throw it away. I didn't need to punish an object for being honest. I needed to stop letting it audition for a role it couldn't play. Then I wrote a list titled Simply Protection. It had 6 items. Independent banking for me, fully funded. Legal review of all guarantees and feeder funds. Freeze on household discretionary spending until further notice, quietly enforced via controls. Inventory and appraise the pieces that are mine by provenance. Establish a personal line of credit in my own name. Never use it. Know it exists. Move sentiments into sentences. Ask. Record verify. I sent the list to no one. I didn't need a chorus. I needed a plan. In the days that followed, Daniel's world began to fray on the edges in ways even he couldn't narrate away. A board member resigned to pursue family time, which is investor speak for lost the vote. 2 deals drifted into euphemism. A profile that had been in the works was quietly downgraded from feature to industry note. The house got a little quieter at night, the way a theater feels when a set has been struck, but the audience hasn't been let in. And then the doorbell rang at 7:15 on a Wednesday, and a man with the neutral face of a professional handed me an envelope and asked me to sign. Not divorce papers. People love that twist too much. A notice of intention from a lender to review collateral positions on North Shore's facility with a paragraph that translated to, "We'd like to verify what we think we own if you don't mind." He did mind. He wasn't home. I placed the envelope next to the linen one in the drawer. The house exhaled. The sea, which had nothing to do with any of this, kept doing its simple, faithful labor on the edge of the city. I stood there a long time and then called my lawyer. "Time to stop rehearsing," I said. "I'm ready to say my lines." Harper likes to say that numbers don't confess, they accumulate. By the time the lender's letter sat in my drawer beside the linen envelope with the necklace, The accumulation had the weight of weather. It wasn't a hurricane yet. It was the barometer quietly falling. Daniel arrived home that night wired and sugar-bright. He radiated solutions. He said words like bridge, instrument, role, and, of course, temporary. I listened the way you listen to a concert in a hall you know too well. You can appreciate the playing and still hear the places the wood is beginning to crack. I told him a lender had sent a notice, not with accusation, just with the voice people use to mention the post. He stilled for half a second, then smiled past it. He insisted it was boilerplate. He folded the envelope in half without reading it, like a man tamping down a thought before it could stand, and changed the subject to a board dinner we had to attend Friday. The implication was clear. This is not the week to be difficult. Harper's second memo arrived the next morning. She wrote like an engineer building a bridge over a ravine, short spans of certainty, no wasted flourish. Covenants, North Shore's leverage ratio breached in 2 trailing quarters, cured by equity letters from insiders. That trick is running out of room. Guarantees, the feeder fund language potentially tags you as a beneficial participant. Not catastrophic, but you do not want to be downstream if collateral shifts. Your lawyer is already on it. Madrigal, recurring invoices across 2 entities, 1 operational, 1 marketing. Descriptions range from display chain to executive package. Quantities inconsistent with one household's needs. At the bottom, a human line in italics. None of this means bad faith. It does mean speed. Move quickly, but keep your hands clean. I moved, quietly without ceremony. I froze the house accounts at standard levels and let the quiet do part of the work. People buy less when cards don't sing. I transferred a sensible amount to the new account my lawyer opened for me, enough to live, not enough to declare war. I sent instructions to payroll for the household staff to be paid directly from a trust that couldn't be starved by someone else's temporary measures. I called the florist and told her that from now on arrangements should be seasonal and honest. She laughed in relief and said she'd been itching to use branches again. Friday's dinner was the kind of room men invent to hear themselves be inevitable. You can tell how close a company is to a cliff by how loudly the tables attempt to drown out the drop. The chandelier was a little too bright, the bottles a little too vintage, the laughter with a little too much glass in it. Daniel performed ease like an Olympic sport, moving from table to table with handshakes that said trust me and shoulders that said I trust me, too. I watched like an anthropologist who has once lived with the tribe and now knows where they bury their dead. At our table, across the centerpiece, sat a woman I'd never met wearing a necklace I had met twice, mine, down to the tiny twist in the loop. She caught me noticing and touched it with 2 fingers, proud. She said her fiancé had given it to her for her birthday, and that it was Orifex, obviously, because her fiancé had a direct relationship. She didn't say fiancé the way women in love say it. She said it the way a person says brand. The man beside her had the tarry polish of someone who always gets the last appointment of the day at a very expensive salon. He laughed and told a story about a deal in which he had been very clever. I smiled and poured water. Later, near the bar, I spotted a second infinity loop on a woman whose face had been in a half-dozen women in finance roundups. Hers had a warmer gold, better plating, perhaps, or better lighting. She told me she adored Orifex, and that her guy collected their older silhouettes. She said it with the certainty of people who collect things primarily to be seen owning them. I did not tell her about Maker's Marks or laser cereals. I went to the powder room and stared at my own collarbones and laughed without sound. On the way home, Daniel chattered about the board member who had been a problem and was now suddenly reasonable, about a potential club deal that would bridge optics, about a profile that might be salvaged if he agreed to be a little more personal. He asked if I'd noticed how well the room had received him. I said I had noticed how loud the room was. He didn't like that answer. He reached over, squeezed my hand, and told me with genuine warmth that he had another surprise in motion for me. I told him, gently, that I did not want another surprise. Then call it a gesture, he said, as if the rebrand made it a responsible use of oxygen. Harper called Saturday morning, unusually early. She does not call unless something has hardened into a shape. She told me that a spreadsheet had turned up in the marketing entity's SharePoint. She sounded faintly amused saying SharePoint, like a spy who'd broken in through a very boring door. The file was titled Prop Locker, and it was exactly what it sounded like. SKUs, quantities, notes. Beside the infinity loop SKU. Good for photos, reads as real in cool light, do not lend to press. A few lines down, cufflinks, a diamond solitaire listed as studio, a pair of hoop earrings under backup set, client spouses. It wasn't a scandal, it was a system. Recipients, I asked, though I knew better than to expect names. No names, she said. Initials, some I can map, others are not obvious. Frequency suggests gifting across several streams, events. Partners, influencers. Wives, I asked. A pause. There is a category called house. She left it there, like a doctor letting you narrate your own pain. I thanked her and went for a walk without my phone. The city was trying on spring. Everything looked like it had been washed. I bought bread and the good butter and carried them home like a small act of loyalty to the visible world. That afternoon, the house manager, Anna, asked whether we should confirm numbers for a renewal event the following month. I stared at her as if she had spoken a language I used to know and now could not place. She explained. The event planner had been holding a date at a hotel in the countryside. There was a draft of vows a planner had asked me to glance at weeks ago, which I had assumed was a template from a magazine. I asked how many guests. She said 120, in a tone that suggested the number had once felt delicious. Daniel came home humming with purpose. He loved a logistics day. It made him feel like a conductor. He confirmed that, yes, a vow renewal had always been part of the plan. Hadn't I told him a year ago that we should ritualize more and improvise less? He pitched it as ballast in a choppy season, a reminder to the world, and to us that our ship had a keel. He framed it as intimacy with witnesses. He named people we could not possibly exclude. When I stood still, he adjusted, finally offering to scale it down if it makes you happier. What would have made me happier was an invitation to a conversation where the baseline was not theater. But happiness wasn't the metric. Safety was. Reality was. I told him scaling down would be wise for optics. He pretended the word belonged to both of us. The next week was a choreography of practicalities. My lawyer returned with a clean list of what could and could not touch me if the lenders decided to flex. Harper built a short-term cash map I could operate without tripping any alarms. I called the charity director and asked her to run pledges through actual cash before printing names on plaques, framing it as best practice rather than prophecy. In my own calendar, I blocked off 2 afternoons as stillness and guarded them like appointments with a cardiologist. There was one thing left I wanted to verify, not for the court, not for Harper, not even for myself, exactly. For the history. For the part of me that would one day tell this story without wanting to improvise. I drove out to Madrigal displays on a Tuesday in a coat that made me look like every other client they service. Not poor, not remarkable. The warehouse sat in a retail park that smelled like rubber and asphalt. Inside, industrial neatness. Shelves, labels, a front desk with a bell that made a noise like a kitchen timer. The woman at reception asked who I was with. I gave the name of Daniel's marketing entity because of course I knew it. She clicked, frowned, brightened, and called someone named Pete. Pete was friendly in the way men are friendly when they think you might be the person who approves their invoices. He walked me through aisles of velvet forms and acrylic risers like he was proud of his city. I asked casual questions about sourcing and lead times. We stopped at a shelf with a cardboard box labeled in black marker, Loop, GT, FAV. He slit the tape, pulled out a plastic-wrapped chain, and held it up like a fish. The pendant winked at me with cheerful complicity. He told me it was their most popular. He said fashion houses use them for shoots for safety. He put it in my hand. The weight told the truth immediately. Do you supply a lot to executives? I asked, as if I collected executives' habits as a hobby. Pete shrugged. Marketing buys most of the showy stuff, he said. C-suites like clean. They want it to read as money on camera and not get anyone mugged at the valet. He laughed, then added, a little more carefully, we don't ask questions, we sell cases. I asked if I could buy a single piece for a fit test, as if I were doing someone else a favor. He said, of course, Singles for existing accounts, no problem. He took my card without a blink. The account had my husband's company's name on it and a tidy credit line. The price was what the website had said, less the discount they gave everyone who bought more than 5. He put the pendant in a white bag and handed it to me with a receipt that looked honest because it had to be. Back in the car, I took my necklace out of the drawer envelope and held both loops in my palm like 2 coins. One was mine, plated and earnest. One was the warehouse sibling, plated and shameless. They were twins. It felt like proof of something that had never needed a courtroom. There is a difference between an illusion and a lie. One you declare, one you conceal. When I got home, Daniel was in the study staring out the window like a person who needs the horizon to stay put. I told him about the vow renewal in a tone that said I wasn't going to argue. He moved toward me with the caution you use near a dog that has learned to read your shoulders. He presented the event as a reset. He talked about linen choices as if fabric could stabilize a quarter. He said he had commissioned something special for me for that night. I told him to cancel it before he said what it was. He laughed it off, then didn't. The next morning, my lawyer called with a sentence that changed the temperature in my blood without changing the facts. The lenders had formally requested a meeting to discuss options. She described a dance I did not want tickets to: restructure, haircut, standstill, enforcement. We talked about what this meant for me. Not us, me. It was bracing and vulgar and necessary. She said the quiet part gently: protect your reputation while you protect your assets. I knew what she meant. The optics of a wife fleeing when the winds pick up are terrible. The optics of a woman prudently minding her perimeter while remaining civil are perfect. I asked her, finally, because cowardice offends me more than pain, whether there was any scenario in which my staying made the numbers kinder. She said no, not in ways that matter to math. Love helps a household. It does not unstretch payables. I spent the afternoon doing small, real things. Answering emails from junior architects who wanted advice, sending notes to 2 scholarship recipients who had thanked the foundation with the kind of gratitude that doesn't make a scene, scheduling a dentist appointment I'd been postponing because teeth remind you that bodies are the baseline. I made a list titled after with banal items like refinance the pied-à-terre and renew passport. I thought about vows and whether the quickest way to break one is to pretend you're renewing it. That night, Daniel came to bed late and lay very still, as if not moving could dial the day backward. I asked him, in the dark, whether he wanted to tell me anything now. Before people with letterhead asked in less forgiving light, he said he had everything under control. He said it in the tinny voice of a person who no longer believes their own advertising. I said I was here. I did not say for how long. The next morning, the charity director called to tell me a donor had pulled a pledge because the market is skittish and people are nervous about commitments. She made it sound like the weather. I told her I would cover the gap personally and that she could list the original donor's name if it mattered to her fundraising. She cried softly, relief, not reverence, and I felt more solid than I had in a month. Money, used correctly, is a kindness machine. 2 days later came the scene the city always demands: a gala. I nearly didn't go. It felt obscene to step into a room designed to pretend gravity is optional. But the foundation I love was about to close a wing of its legal clinic if we missed a pledge cycle, and I know the particular magic of rooms where people in evening wear are made to feel morally useful. I put on a dress I'd worn 3 times. I asked the driver to take the long way so I could look at streets that had nothing to sell me. I fastened no necklace. Under the chandeliers, the usual pageant. Men who pant after numbers and then pretend to be shy around them. Women who choreograph sincerity like a martial art. Daniel worked the room with strategic warmth. I stood with the director and ushered checks with exactly the right amount of gratitude. And then, across the floor, the small cruelty I'd half expected. Another woman with my loop. A third, joking with her friend that everyone's husband shops at the same place now. They laughed. It wasn't unkind. It was just true. Halfway through the auction, the host, a man famous for pretending not to read from teleprompters, called my name unexpectedly and asked me to say a few words about why the clinic's work matters. It wasn't planned, which is why it worked. I spoke without notes about paperwork as oxygen, how the ability to understand a form is sometimes the difference between dignity and the wrong kind of dependence. People clap the way people clap when they recognize themselves being described. The director squeezed my hand. I felt my face return to me, like a mirror that had been fogged and now cleared. On the way out, by the coat check, a woman stopped me and said she had been at a talk I'd given years ago about rooms that make people kinder. She said she still thought about a line I'd used. The door isn't generous if it only opens for one kind of body. I laughed because I had forgotten saying it. She told me she was divorcing and that my sentences made her feel less foolish for wanting doors that fit. I wished her stamina. She wished me luck without nomming why. Women are very good at that. When I got home, Daniel was already there. He had turned on every light and opened a bottle that people buy for its label. He looked handsome and brittle. He told me we had made a good impression and that 2 board members had softened. He poured and asked why I hadn't worn the necklace. I told him I liked my throat naked. He did not find that funny. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. He said it was ridiculous to try to time tenderness, but that tonight felt like the right night. He said a vow renewal without the world knowing he had chosen me again would feel incomplete. He opened the box. Inside, a ring that would have stunned me a year ago. It shone with the cold fire of a stone that knows the camera is watching. It sat in a mount designed to be seen from tables away. It was beautiful in a way that made me sad. I did not ask what it was made of. I did not ask for a receipt. I did not take it. I closed the box very gently and put it back in his hand. I told him I would accept one gift in this season: honesty. He stared at me like I had spoken a language he'd once studied and forgotten. He began, out of habit, to narrate. I stopped him, kindly. I told him what I knew, not like a prosecutor, but like a historian. The prop locker, the lender letter, the covenants that don't negotiate, the way the wires had started to arrive 2 days late, the way my name had been moved a half-inch to make room for someone else's obligations. I told him about the appraisers and the acid and the kind woman at Orifex who had offered to clean a lie for me because that is some people's job. I told him that the worst of it wasn't the math. It was the theater. He sat down as if someone had lowered the oxygen in the room. He asked, in a very small voice, whether I loved him. It was so unexpected I almost laughed. I told him love was not the problem. Privacy was not the problem. Pride was not the problem. The problem was that I had been conscripted into an illusion without being asked whether I believed in magic. He reached for the last weapon he knew, performance of remorse. He said he was sorry. He said he should have told me earlier. He said he had been protecting me. He said he had convinced himself that if he bought us time, the truth could arrive later without consequence. He said he had given me the loop because he hadn't wanted me to feel hunted. He said the ring was real. I didn't ask to verify. I told him, very clearly, what I needed if there was to be a we on the other side of what was coming. Cancel the vow renewal. Call the lenders and stop negotiating with adjectives. Bring in an external restructuring firm even if it bruised his vanity. Dismantle the prop machine. Stop using gifts to plaster over the place's meaning was supposed to go. Sit with me in a room with both our lawyers and put everything on paper that had until now lived in fog. He asked what he would get in return. I said the one thing he couldn't buy. A companion who would tell him the truth and stand in the storm if asked, but only if asked as an equal. He said yes to all of it, the way people say yes when the alternative is learning to live without their own reflection. I didn't believe him because belief is a muscle. Mine was not dead, but it was not going to lift a piano that night. I slept in the guest room, not as punishment, as practice. In the morning, he sent 3 emails with subjects that suggested repentance. Cancel, engage, pause. He forwarded me each like a student showing work. The lenders' meeting was set for Thursday. He told the planner the vow renewal would be intimate, at home, no press. He told Mark to close the Madrigal account. Mark replied with a single word, done. I pictured him sitting at his desk, hands shaking a little, and hoped he slept that night. Harper, when I told her the shape of the week, said good. She reminded me that intent is nice and covenants are math. My lawyer, when I told her the same, said good, then told me to pack a bag with 3 days of clothing and put it in the trunk of my car, because sometimes solutions take detours, and it helps if you have a sweater. I did what she said. The lenders arrived like weather, one genial, one dry, one with a voice like a stapler. We spent 4 hours in a room with water that never quite got cold. I watched men use words as pulleys and then watched physics remind them what weight does. By the end, there was a framework that would keep the building standing if everyone held their corner without improvisation. Daniel looked 10 years older and 5 years more himself. He squeezed my hand under the table once, not for reassurance. For gratitude. That night, alone in the kitchen, I took the loop from the linen envelope and held it one last time. It was lovely, in the way illusions made with care are lovely. I put it back in the drawer. In the following days, small good things began to happen because we had stopped lying to ourselves. The charity director sent a photo of the clinic's new sign going up. The florist texted me a picture of branches she'd used in a lobby that looked suddenly like a room for humans. Our chef made soup that tasted like someone had remembered salt. My shoulders dropped half an inch. The house breathed. We did not hold a vow renewal. We held dinner at home for 6 people who have never lied to me. We ate too late and laughed in the way tired people do when tired is no longer a euphemism for afraid. Daniel sat beside me and did not perform. He still wanted, reflexively, to narrate. He caught himself sometimes and simply sat. It was almost unbearable and almost beautiful. A week later, Harper sent a final note on Prop Locker. The account had been closed. The remaining inventory returned. Her last bullet was a sentence that did not belong in a spreadsheet and therefore mattered more. You were right to verify. You were kinder than necessary, which is rare in rooms like these. I stood by the window and watched the city pretend, as it always does, that it invented the sunrise. I thought about the first morning I'd mentioned insurance and how polished his refusal had been. I thought about how many women had loops around their throats that photographed as truth. I thought about how you can love someone and still choose to stop living inside their theater. Then I went to my desk and wrote 2 lists. The first, titled If We Stay, had 5 items and a calendar next to each. The second, titled If We Go, had the same. I placed them side by side like architectural options and felt no panic. Numbers accumulate, so does dignity. I had started a ledger for both. The first week after the lenders, meeting felt like living inside a contract where every clause had a pulse. Nothing dramatic broke. Everything insisted. Calendars populated themselves with nouns that used to be other people's problem. Standstill, waterfall, intercreditor, cure period. The men with stapler voices returned, this time accompanied by a woman who didn't smile, and yet managed to lower the room's temperature with kindness. She spoke seldom, and only to move the conversation 1 clean square forward. If Harper was a lighthouse, this woman was ballast. Daniel did something unfamiliar and therefore heroic. He kept not performing. He still had the habit of reaching for adjectives when silence would do, but he stopped dressing numbers in tuxedos. He called the restructuring firm the lender's preferred, even though he hated the optics, and told them to get on with it. He returned 2 cars he didn't actually like. He allowed Mark to answer emails with no instead of circling back soon. He flinched at none of it, or at least he flinched privately. At home, we rewrote the house rules, not on stationery. At the sink over coffee, with receipts as punctuation. The florist sent branches that looked like sentences. The chef cooked poor people food, beans, greens, stock made of bones that had been forgiven for being cheap, and the house smelled like someone had remembered that nourishment is not a synonym for show. I told Daniel about the linen envelope in the drawer and the second loop I'd bought at Madrigal for history's sake. I said I was keeping both, not as trophies, but as study material. He laughed once without pleasure, then said he had asked Mark to close the account and send whatever cases remained back to the warehouse. They'll turn them into risers, he said, and we both smiled at the aptness. Props turned into platforms. The vow renewal evaporated into a small dinner for 6, which was both easier and harder. Easier because no one had to lie, harder because there are fewer places to hide when there's no string trio. Daniel toasted, having something to repair, which a year ago would have sounded like a line. It sounded like labor now. We washed our own glasses. Work moved like weather. The lenders parked their entitlement in a file labeled standstill, which bought time in exchange for disclosure and discipline. The board brought in an interim chair whose talent was saying no in a way that made investors feel understood. The press published 2 pieces with alarming headlines and reasonable bodies. A third died in draft, because someone realized the story wasn't sexy if everyone behaved like adults. The men in my inbox, who used to invite us to dinners with place cards, switched to coffees with agendas. I said yes to the charitable coffees and no to the performative ones. Harper sent me a final memo on exposure that read like a field guide, where the wolves hide, which bushes are just bushes, which paths are pretty but pointless. My lawyer updated a binder labeled perimeter and physically handed it to me like a diploma. "You don't need to carry it," she said. "You need to know it exists." A week into the new routine, reality did what it always does. It mixed the profound with the petty. The small charity where I sit on the board needed a venue because the sponsor's hall had a sprinkler issue. We hosted in our garden, a mid-tier solution that felt like top tier to the students who had never been in a garden where the grass was this obedient. A girl with a legal pad and nervous hands told me she'd been afraid to apply until she saw my name under mentors available. I took her card. She cried. I did not. That night, after folding the rental chairs with the volunteers, I found Daniel in the kitchen with his sleeves rolled and the ring box, unopened, on the counter. "Do you want me to return it?" he asked, almost shy. I said I wanted it appraised. He nodded like a student who'd learned the new rules. "Do you want it if it's real?" he asked. I told him I wanted us to get to a place where the question didn't matter. He didn't sleep well. I did, finally, like someone whose jaw had unclenched. 2 mornings later, a letter arrived not from lenders or lawyers but from Orifex. Handwritten, on paper that remembered forests. The woman with the braid thanked me for bringing the loop in, not because she wanted to shame anyone, but because she wanted me to know that she had thought about our conversation and was sending a small gift. A tiny gold tag stamped with their discreet mark, attached to a thin, honest chain. "Not to replace anything," she wrote, "but to remind you what verification feels like when it's gentle." It was the only piece of jewelry I put on without thinking for months. Because life refuses to be tidy, the same week brought a scene written by someone who enjoys irony. I ran into the woman from the board dinner, the one with the loop and the hair that photographed perfectly at a coffee shop queue. She beamed at me like we were alumni of the same school and lifted her pendant with 2 fingers. "We match," she said. I smiled and said we did. She leaned closer, conspiratorial. "My fiancé says real is overrated," she said. "What matters is the look." She said look like other people say love. I wished her good weather and meant it. Then came the day the press insists upon, an interview, not for a profile of Daniel, for a piece on the clinic's expansion that focused on the women it served. The journalist asked me about optics and resilience and the intersection of private money and public good. I gave her sentences I had earned. When she fished for a line about standing by your man, I smiled and described standing with people who tell the truth. The piece ran with a photo of a student, not me. Perfect. At home, the house kept practicing being a place where things are repaired instead of replaced. The chef made a cake with fruit that tasted like August pretending to be June. Anna negotiated down a vendor bill without apologizing. Mark smiled like he'd been taught to breathe again. Daniel brought me 3 receipts without being asked and said, "Not because you need them, because we both do." I pinned them with a magnet that used to hold a picture of us on a beach where I now remember we were both performing exhaustion. We decided, without ceremony, to take 2 months apart. Not because we were done, because we weren't, and proximity can be corrosive when 2 people are attending to different fires. I moved into the pied-à-terre with a week's clothing, the Orifex tag around my throat, and the linen envelope in a desk drawer. He kept the house and the schedule that had always claimed him, this time with fewer props. We set the terms like adults. 2 evenings a week for dinner, no surprises, no gifts, receipts optional, truth mandatory. We told no one except the lawyer, who already knew, and Sophia, who always knows. In the small apartment, silence arrived like a guest who cleaned the kitchen. I opened windows. I slept like a person who owns her own night. I started answering my own emails instead of forwarding them to assistants. I met 2 young architects for coffee and told them where the door frames pinch in the firms they think they want. I wrote 4 letters that had waited too long. To the scholarship director with a check earmarked for the boring expenses nobody funds. To the girl with the legal pad with 3 questions that will save her 6 months if she answers them honestly. To the woman in the coat check line who told me she was divorcing in case she needed a lawyer who wasn't a shark. To the woman with the loop, not to correct her, but to invite her to the clinic's opening so she could watch a door open for someone who had never been allowed in the building. Daniel and I met for those 2 dinners each week in ordinary places: Turkish, a bistro with stained menus, a diner that serves an indecent club sandwich. He practiced not narrating while I practiced not cross-examining. Once, in the middle of talking about nothing important, he reached up and touched the tiny Orifex tag at my throat with one finger and said, "That suits you." It was the nicest thing he'd said in months because it didn't try to save him. On a Wednesday in the 2nd month, he texted a photo of a check wired to the clinic on time with the subject "No theatrics," and I laughed out loud in a room no one could see. On a Friday in the same week, the interim chair sent a note thanking spouses for tolerating the boring season, and I deleted it without replying. We were not tolerating, we were choosing. And then, because stories like decisions, the lenders signed. Not a victory, not a capitulation, a structure. A staircase down that could be walked without breaking useful ankles. The announcement was a paragraph in the Financial Times that no one outside the people who go looking would notice. He forwarded it to me with a single line: "We can breathe now." I replied, "Good, breathing is underrated." He asked when I wanted to come home. I said I wasn't sure the word home should be used casually anymore. He said he understood. The next morning in the mirror, the Orifex tag winked at me like a secret I wasn't ashamed of. In the desk, the linen envelope lay flat. In my inbox, the girl with the legal pad had sent 3 answers to the 3 questions, and a 4th question I couldn't have imagined asking at her age. Outside, the city tried on a new month and for once did not insist I buy anything. There was one scene left before the ending could decide what kind it wanted to be. Daniel sent a calendar invite titled "Kitchen Table." No restaurant, no witnesses. Contracts on one side, the ring box on the other, a pen that could sign either. Terms and conditions, which is to say, a choice. When the truth finally surfaced, it didn't crash down on me all at once. It seeped in slowly, like water through a crack, until I was standing in the middle of my marriage and realizing I didn't recognize any of it anymore. The necklace, that beautiful, elegant gift that had once felt like a symbol of love, was no longer just a piece of jewelry. It had become a metaphor for everything that had been hidden beneath the surface. After weeks of tension, I decided to act. I took the necklace to a private jeweler for appraisal, telling myself it was just for insurance purposes, even though part of me already knew what I was going to hear. The appraisal took all of 15 minutes. When the jeweler came back, he wore that polite but careful expression people use when they're about to say something unpleasant. "This isn't real gold," he told me gently. "It's high-quality plated metal, but it's not worth even a fraction of what you think." I remember sitting there, my hands trembling around the small velvet box and feeling a strange mix of emotions: anger, confusion, humiliation. Not because the necklace wasn't real, but because our entire life together suddenly felt like it wasn't either. That night, I confronted him. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just placed the necklace on the table and asked why he lied. At first, he tried to brush it off. He said it didn't matter, that the sentimental value was what counted. But when I pressed harder, the dam broke. He confessed that the business wasn't doing as well as I thought. The lavish lifestyle, the expensive trips, the image of success, it was all held together with loans, risky investments, and a carefully constructed illusion. The millionaire husband I had built my life around was drowning in debt. The necklace wasn't insured because he couldn't insure it. It wasn't worth anything to insure. But that wasn't the worst of it. The deeper I dug, the more I discovered a trail of financial secrets, hidden accounts, and yes, other women. Not affairs in the traditional sense, but a series of calculated relationships, transactional and cold, designed to keep his business afloat or his ego intact. I wasn't the first woman to wear a necklace like this. And as it turned out, I wasn't the only one he'd made promises to. The devastation that followed wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet and relentless. I moved through the motions of divorce like someone trapped underwater, signing papers, meeting lawyers, dividing assets that were far less than they appeared. But there was one thing I refused to compromise on. I demanded my share. Every cent, every asset, every legal entitlement. And I got it. It wasn't out of spite, at least, not entirely. It was about reclaiming the years I had invested, the trust I had given, the future I had built in my mind. And when the dust settled, I found myself standing on the balcony of a sunlit apartment in a city I had always dreamed of living in, wearing the same necklace that had once symbolized love and now symbolized freedom. It didn't matter that it wasn't real gold. I was. In time, I built a life that wasn't dependent on anyone else. I invested the settlement wisely, started a small company of my own, and surrounded myself with people who valued me for more than the roles I could play in their lives. And slowly, the anger began to fade. It wasn't replaced by forgiveness. I doubt I'll ever truly forgive him, but by something far more powerful: indifference. Sometimes I still catch headlines about him, rumors about new ventures, lawsuits, another failed business. And every now and then, I get a message from someone who's just learned the truth about the man they thought they knew. It no longer stings. If anything, it reminds me of the most important lesson I learned from all of this: that love built on lies will always collapse under the weight of the truth. So now, when I clasp that necklace around my neck before stepping out into the world, I don't think about the man who gave it to me. I think about the woman who walked away with her head held high. The woman who learned that even the most beautiful illusions can shatter, and that sometimes, when they do, they reveal a strength you never knew you had.